Hello friends, welcome to episode 158 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Not too bad. Had a good dinner. Enjoyed a nice cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, got to finally finish reading through this game.
Mm-hmm.
We got a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about.
In, like, different chunks.
Yeah. So, it is the second Wednesday of the month, and that means it is System Spotlight time again. And this week, we have a game that kind of came out of left field, for me at least.
I will flat out say that our marketing person found this for us.
Okay.
Gave a list of a bunch of different games, and I kind of read through it. I was like, okay, this one. Okay, Jiangshi Blood in the Banquet Hall. And I'm like, is this going to be like Get Dr. Lucky or like, you know, like a one-shot kind of thing?
Right. To me, like, my brain immediately went to games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians. You know?
Yeah.
Like, it's very good at doing one very particular type of little story that's just kind of goofy and light.
And it doesn't mean that we won't learn something from it or we won't be able to take something because it was newer. I knew that. It was relatively, because when I clicked on the original thing, it was going to a Kickstarter. I was like, oh boy, are we going to even be able to look at this yet? Kind of a thing. So we threw it on the list of options because we were like, of course, you know, we'll try anything.
And I remember you throwing it on the list, and I remember looking at it kind of going like, Jiangshi Blood in the in the Banquet Hall. What is this? And you're like, oh, it's neat.
Yeah, and
it's about Chinese immigrants that run a Chinese restaurant during the day and fight the supernatural during the night.
Yeah.
And, like, with that quick little Reader's Digest clip, I remember thinking to myself, like, what kind of racist BS is this? Like,
and in all honesty, it does very much scream that based on face value.
But, you know, I suppose, actually, you know, I have to cop to actually probably being the one that did the racism here, because I assumed that it was written by a bunch of white dudes.
Okay.
And it's not.
It is not.
It's written by Chinese Americans, about Chinese Americans.
Not even contemporary.
Kind of for Chinese Americans.
Sort of.
That's a kind of.
And yeah, and we'll kind of get into that, but like, let's take it back a step. So, I downloaded it from Drive-Thru RPG, which I will say is not the best way to do this one. Only because there were other materials. I'm just going to set that as a thing.
There are cards, dice, and a game board almost.
It's a 3.5 pound box.
Uh-huh.
for a role-playing game? Again, we'll get to that. It was kickstarted back in August 13th, 2020. Was funded on the first day with 100,000 in pledges. Mm-hmm. So, it was known. Sen Fulim Sen Fenglim, sorry, apologize. We are going to be terrible at this all night long, by the way.
Neither he or I speak Mandarin, so we deeply apologize for mispronunciations. We're doing our best.
Is known for two things that we've already, well, kind of one thing. We had Kids on Bikes, Teens in Space. Mm-hmm. But has been, did work with Gears of Defiance, North Sea Epilogues, Never Going Home, The Curse, The Curse of the House of Rookwood, which
yeah.
I've looked into, and Mecha and Monsters 2 Evolved, but then grabbed Banana-chan, who is another writer who has worked
grabbed
on...
who?
What?
Grabbed who?
Banana-chan. Exactly.
Sorry.
But both amazingly lovely individuals, well written. I actually want to look into Demos Academy. It's something newer, and I'm kind of intrigued, as well as the new thing that they're both involved in, which is Exquisite Crime, which I'm not going to get into.
It just sounds delightful by the title.
It's literally Exquisite Crime and like an unusual storytelling.
Okay.
So I'm intrigued by it, but I'm not going to step into that at all. But either way, Banana-chan was actually, because of this, pulled in to write the Jiangshi that are in D&D Ravenloft.
Yes.
Which I thought was amazing.
The new Ravenloft supplements gives the ability to like make your own spoopy realm.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
And yeah, some of them they give all sorts of different themes for spoopy things you can throw in there. So it's great to see the Jiangshi put in there and represented.
Yeah, and I mean they did little tweaks, but of course that's it's fantasy. You can do
Sure.
that. But it was just neat that that they were asked to, after somebody had heard about this, we're like, hey, can you help us? Right? Because we want these sound really cool. And just to put it in perspective, before we even get into the game, the Jiangshi are Chinese hopping vampires.
Say it again. Chinese hopping vampires. Now,
they are old.
I'm gonna say this.
Yes.
Before we ever get started in any of this.
Yes.
Okay. Do yourself the favor, look up on YouTube a movie called Mr. Vampire.
Yes.
There is a 10-minute clip out there of just some dudes fighting Chinese hopping vampires.
It's fantastic.
It is fantastic, and if you do not want do not immediately want to play a role-playing game set, in that game world.
And that feeling.
Like it's crazy. It's just amazing.
So
look it up.
So let's talk a little bit about what those are just in reference. So historically, they are relatives of a person who died far away from home and couldn't afford transportation for the deceased body to be returned, because basically people would be sad being away from home. They wouldn't rest properly.
The spirit would wander because it was lost.
Yeah, so a Taoist priest would come and conduct a ritual to reanimate the body, and travel with the body by night, where it would hop basically home, and they would ring a bell to let people know not to look upon it and receive a bad omen and bad juju basically from doing that.
Right. Now, the reason they would hop is because Jiangshi translates to stiff body.
Yes.
Which basically refers to the rigor mortis that is set in. The Jiangshi cannot, because they're corpses, they're just literally dead bodies with rigor mortis, can't move their limbs. So essentially they're just arms out and are able to kind of hop a little bit, but not really ambulate.
Right. That all being said, the truth behind that was that, that kind of did happen. People had to get home. And so oftentimes when somebody had to be buried away from where they had passed, they would literally get two individuals. They would effectively hire them, and they would arrange the corpses upright, single file, and be tied to long bamboo rods on both sides. So like a railing almost. That would then be placed on the shoulders of two men on the front and the back, who would then carry them to their destination by night often, with somebody ringing the bell, presumably to help alert people they're there. But if you were to glance at them in the dark or at a distance, you would see two individuals and then these hopping, stiff people in between.
Yep.
Thus creating the illusion or the imagery of what people perceived. And I that whole wrapped beauty of the story, of the mythos, of how it became, is wonderful to me. I love that.
Yeah.
I love all parts of that.
Now now in kind of popular culture, what the Jiangshi have turned into is these hopping vampires. So they are rigor mortis ridden corpses that rise from the dead and seek out essentially the life force of other people.
Yes.
And they will siphon your ki, your life energy out of you.
Yeah.
And can make you sick, or could outright, if they kill you like this, you might become a Jiangshi yourself.
Exactly. But that kind of energy exchange comes into play within the story even, and how they affect the area around them, almost an energy rot, if you will, that kind of projects from them. And areas that they've been in and things that they've done, and that they're kind of intelligent to a demonic nature, where they have an organization at times and can do things. It's not like, not like, Army of the Dead or anything like that. It's more like it's not demon culture.
It's not Vampire the Masquerade. We're not, we're not mafia organizations running the city from the shadows or anything like that here. But
it might be,
there might be a pack of Jiangshi together that have a goal.
Yeah. that is more than just
hop
brains,
around and eat people, yeah.
you know, kind of a thing. So,
so where does our game come into this?
that's an interesting point. The game itself, in short, and again, like we said, is you are playing a family that own or are starting or are translating, depending on the story style that you're doing, a Chinese restaurant in the 1920s. So we're not even contemporary. We're talking about a specific time period. A time period that is well defined in these books, or in this book, and through pages and pages of careful explanation of how history spanned for the Chinese Americans through not only America and China, but also Canada.
Yep.
And how that affected them, and sets kind of this stage of community, of mixed community, of power, of racism, of struggle, all wrapped into one.
There are seven. The book itself is 149 pages.
Yep.
71 of them, like 48% of the book, is history and cultural background information on Chinese culture in the 1920s. As
well as how to play that, which I think is the kind of thing that drew me even further into this.
Yeah. It really, like, it does such a good job of painting a picture of what the world was like for a Chinese immigrant during that time. And they talk a lot about, like, the Boxer Rebellion in China and the
internments.
They
address it.
Was there internment? No, the Chinese Exclusion Act.
Exclusion Act. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not the internments. It was
the Exclusion Act.
Internments.
Yeah.
But things like the Exclusion Act, and like how we're culturally, like, the Chinese rail workers and stuff that came in because there was, the Exclusion Act where, like, basically you couldn't hire new Chinese workers. You couldn't bring new Chinese people in, with very certain exceptions and stuff like that. So they had a really rough road immigration wise.
Yeah.
And then, Chinatown started. Basically, the first Chinatown was in San Francisco, though they make mention of, I want to say it was like Vancouver, Los Angeles, New York, and I want to say there was one more in Canada. Toronto?
I believe that might be correct.
Have pretty prevalent Chinatowns as well.
Yeah, and these were, at their time periods, very different than what we know today. They were sometimes cattle areas. They were rail areas that were bustling because they were bringing transportation to a specific point, whether by sea and then by rail and then driving things. So there were all these other cultural aspects of America and of business mashing at the same time that these cultural areas were being built up.
Yep. And then San Francisco specifically because it was the entry point to America for a lot of Chinese immigrants being on the West Coast.
Yep.
And so they detail a lot of that, how Chinatowns kind of came to be and what a lot of the cultural influences were in them. And then what cultural influences were pushing against them from the outside. And so they get into a lot of the not just the Chinese Exclusion Act and stuff like that, but a lot of the more subtle racisms and stuff like that would be pressing against them. Because there was even stuff like there was a bubonic plague outbreak, I guess, in San Francisco Chinatown. Where they quarantined off the entire area, and of course, white people got a hold of that and were like, Chinese people are plague bearers. Yeah. And just mass hysteria and more racism and stuff like that. So.
Right. But it paints the picture and helps with the understanding of where this is all kind of coming from.
Exactly.
And the roots of it. And for me, I love hearing that, but hearing it from the perspective of here's the history. This is where we are at. We're not saying all of this wasn't culturally important, but it's what makes the scene.
And what occurred to me too is that as I was reading over it, I'm like, wow, this is a lot of history that like they kind of expect you to know before walking into this game, and it feels like a lot. But then I realized, like, I read this much lore on freaking lizard men in Faerun, I read this much history for Waterdeep. So, like, really, there's no
Right.
There's no excuse for not reading over this stuff and knowing it and understanding the culture and whatnot and stuff like that.
Right. And the other thing that they do a really good job at the beginning of, and they had a lot of help with this because they wanted to address the fact that most of the people stepping into this game who are seeing this probably are not Chinese Americans, that they don't have the understanding. So how do you not do a faux pas?
Do a racism.
Do a racism with, I'm not racist, but did I just do something racist? Do I have racism in what I'm doing or how I'm playing the game or how I'm running the game?
Yeah, and it's like literally the first page. They're like, look, white people, it's okay.
Yeah.
Play this game, please, by all means.
Yeah. The only thing that they did...
If you stream it, we would prefer you have a Chinese American or Chinese Canadian at your table.
Yeah.
I'll say Chinese American in the North American sense.
Thank you.
Just to clean it up a little bit, so I don't constantly say Chinese Canadian as well. But a Chinese North American at your table, because representation very much matters.
Very much.
And wholly agree. We say that all the time. Representation matters.
Yeah, they actually reached out to James Mendez-Hodes, who is prolific in working on cultural and I'll use cultural in all the sense.
Cultural
sensitivities and adjustments. Most recently, you may be aware of a piece he did on orcs in writing and how he made it very clear that, like, Tolkien did no favors to a race that was literally designed to be a fighting race, and created and crafted this and basically created a racist belief that has been carried on about a culture. And he explained that, and that goes beyond not liking that, but not liking the inference that it creates.
You got a great quote here from him. It says, if we play a game and how you or the game talk about orcs reminds me of how racists talk about me, memories of racism distract me and I cannot enjoy the game. If you like, call it a me problem, not a you problem. If you want that kind of game, cool. I just won't join you. You'll be better off without me. I'll be better off without you. Not calling you racist or evil, just stating a preference. But it's better we discuss this now rather than midway through the game, yeah?
And that right there was the crux of what he was trying to get across in talking about orcs. But I think that comment dissected and extrapolated into the whole opening of this book, which was referred to as safety. And that open door policy of, hey, this isn't comfortable for me, I need to go, and no, oh, whoa, or what's your problem, or just, okay, you got it. And that's perfectly fine. It's not that, like, there's any animosity between players at that point. That's literally just a step off.
I don't hate you. I'm not telling you have to change. I'm just not going to sit at your table. It's not my thing.
Right. Yeah. Like, maybe just for this game.
Sure.
Maybe even just for this scene. Doesn't matter. It's just an open door policy of acceptance on that, and that's something that you need to have when you're dealing with these types of things.
Yeah.
It's not just about having an X card at the table, which they do describe in very short, but make it very point that an X card is necessary. Or even talking about the length that they go into talking about lines and veils.
Yeah.
Lines being things that are hard stops at the table that players are not going to accept. Like, we do not want whatsoever to have child abuse at the table in any form.
Sure.
Done.
Sure.
Versus a veil where you might have the inference of nudity at your table, but it's always a cutaway.
Yeah, I'm okay with sex being a thing in my game, but just let's not describe it. Like,
exactly.
They go giggling into the next room and to fade to black.
Right. The next morning, kind of a thing. And
do we all know what happened? Yes. Did we describe it?
No. Because it's not necessary. And that's the thing. And that can go for anything. We were talking about tonight over dinner that one of our players doesn't has severe issues with water and drowning. And so one of the things you literally drew a line in the game is that there shall be no drowning. That will never be something that happens.
I looked him in the eye and I told him, I'm like, look, I'm telling you out of game in a meta sense, water will never be a danger in this game. If you see water, you can be rest assured no one is drowning in it. It will never be a hazard, etc. Because that's a sensitivity to you. Like, we might get on a boat. I never want you to worry, like, oh God, is the next scene going to be this boat capsizing?
Right.
Maybe, but you'll wash up on shore immediately, safe and sound, and the adventure will continue from there.
Exactly.
The water will never be a danger.
So, the idea of creating this environment, of talking about it, is the crux of the opening of the book. And then stepping into playing those characters. Like, how do you play a Asian American, a Chinese North American? Like, what does it mean to be that without it being a trope or a stereotype? How do you avoid those things? How do you avoid being, following a racism that you may not even be aware of? And one of the things they said, which I think is really good, and we again address that by not even talking about Chinese Americans, but how this can be expressed, is that we often get the question, like, how do I play an X when I'm a Y?
Right.
How can I be respectful? And one of the things specifically with this that he said was, that they say in the book is, think instead about how you take one of those aspects and make it feel casual or normal. Something extraordinary that you do. Like, maybe you love Mahjong, or maybe you're really, really good at math, or maybe something like that. Like, how do you make that feel casual or normal? What are some analogous
analogous practices, yes.
That in your real life that you can put with that.
I think one of the big examples they were talking about is like casually having a shrine to your ancestors or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
that you see every day
or something like that. In your house every day. Like, most people don't have shrines in their houses, but these people do.
Yeah.
Culturally, they would. So how do you just make that feel normal and casual?
Yeah. A good example of that without it becoming extreme was in oh God, now I'm losing it. I'll come back to it, but some recent shows tend to add family or cultural elements to them that people just move through. It becomes part of your ritual, often referred to as like your religion of your day. And that is what makes it different. That's what allows you to step into those shoes. Like, if I want to, like, I don't live in New York City. I don't know what it means to be a courier in New York City. But maybe if, like, biking is my thing, like, I feel strong and powerful and I can zip through cars, like, and move through things, maybe I can make that a passion of mine. So it becomes aspects of what I do every day. I wake up every morning, I get my bike down, I check tire pressure, I make sure my pads are good while I'm literally making coffee and doing other things. It's just part of who I am every day. And that's the difference. That's the shift that you have to do. You're not making a trope out of, like, every step of the way, this is what I'm doing. I'm always including biking in everything I do. That's not where we're going with this. That's where you start stereotyping and making it comical. We're talking about a deeply rooted, not just passion, but life, existence. A true religion, if you will.
Yeah.
And of course, avoiding stereotypes is one of the biggest things you can do.
Yeah. And you want to, it's okay to have a character that knows martial arts, but, like, being quote unquote the martial artist is racist.
Or having everybody know martial, even the grandmother fighting, using martial arts.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Okay, it's a bit of a stereotype there.
This isn't Kung Fu Hustle. That is literally a failing, but at the same time, comedic to a comedic degree. And
they make note that, like, the problem isn't that a Chinese character is a martial artist. It's that martial arts defines them in a way that an English boxer or a Greek wrestler wouldn't be defined in the same way.
Right. They don't walk around half naked, covered in oil all the time.
Right. So it's just being mindful that it's okay to do things that are quote unquote stereotypically, those type of characters, but just make sure that you're rounding that character out and not just defining them by that one aspect.
And other things they talk about is don't use accents. You know, if you're talking about honor or family honor, unless you're clearly defining what that honor means through the actions of the person, it doesn't have reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and like, don't start spouting fortune cookie statements.
Yeah, yeah. Fortune cookies weren't even Chinese; they were actually Japanese.
Yeah, and sold to Chinese restaurants.
And sold to Chinese
that
restaurants
were often owned by Japanese people, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
there's a lot of like, especially in the restaurant industry, I find that like there's a lot of like Pan Asian cross ownership. Cross,
yeah.
I don't know what the right word for it is, but like, one of my earlier memories, there was a really great Japanese restaurant that popped up around my house when I was living with my parents, and I would go there, and I'm like, and I was learning Japanese at the time. I actually spent some time in Japan as an exchange student in high school, and so I went to this Japanese restaurant and said to the Asian guy who was cooking my food something in Japanese, and he just kind of smirked at me and went, "I'm Korean, dude." Yeah. And I was like, Oh, okay. I mean, you're doing an amazing job cooking my Japanese, food at a Japanese restaurant. I apologize. I made an assumption there that was incorrect.
Yeah. And I think that's something common that we really do.
Yeah.
Like, we just assume. But, I mean, how many people who make American burgers are American, like...
What even is American, honestly?
That's the key. That's the thing.
But, we don't ask the people making our pizza to be Italian, we don't
even though that really isn't Italian, so...
Yeah, that's really not Italian. Yeah.
The
people at Olive Garden aren't Italian either, so...
God, no. God, no.
That's okay, neither is their food.
Yeah, and the other thing that kind of comes back to the veils concept, not so much the lines, is don't say the racial slurs.
Yes.
Don't use them.
It is absolutely okay and in fact preferred to be like, the cop comes in and starts shaking you down for protection money. He calls you a lot of awful slurs.
That's it.
That's his dialogue.
That's his dialogue.
That is his dialogue. We don't need to hear them. We know that there are Asian slurs out there.
Yeah. Or you can even say, like, he's talking to you and, is asking questions. He starts asking you about the murder that happened in the alley last night and specific details about the woman and addressing some points about the restaurant's cleanliness back there, and then immediately throws into racial slurs about, things in the alley. And you're like, and that's it.
Yep.
That's it. You've just handled it.
Yep.
And that level may be the accepted level. You may be able to veil it a little further than that and even address like to which direction they're going with it, but then that still depends on the comfort of the people at the table, right? But never go full into it. That there's no reason for it. Everybody understands that we're all communicating at the same level. And we're trying to eliminate that. That's the point. Is we're addressing and moving through the story to keep us all aware of what's going on and that it is the horrible thing. And that's the one other thing, is that NPCs who create tension are the ones using that. Mm-hmm. It is not for the players. Yeah. It is not for the supportive characters.
Yes.
This isn't for them to use.
Racists are an antagonist force in this game.
Correct.
Designed to be pushing against you in much in the same way the Jiangshi are.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got members of your own community who are creating tension and causing issues, aka other NPCs, sure. As a storyteller, that could be acceptable.
Yeah, then look, there are whole themes in this game about like racial assimilation, and like assimilating into quote unquote American culture, and what does that mean for leaving your own Chinese culture behind? What does that make you, by assimilating in, and especially in a environment of heavy racism where assimilating might mean becoming more like the racists that hate you. There are some cultural questions there, and understandably they create some tensions in places like 1920s Chinatown.
Especially, yeah.
And so, there very well might be other Chinese people using racial slurs because there's just those types of tensions,
So now that this has taken up about as much of the book as...
Yeah, we're like a half hour in and we haven't talked about the game.
Let's start at least talking about what's in this 3.5 pound box.
Right.
That got shipped out. Besides amazing art and a book that is hilarious to me when I first started paging through it. It literally
looks like a Chinese takeout menu. It's hilarious.
Like,
there are...
It's subtle until you notice it because it doesn't make sense. Like the bands across titles.
The section headings, yeah.
The section headings have the name and the section heading on the left side, and it's a band that goes left to right on the right side.
And there's a little bit of Mandarin,
and then
Mandarin
a price.
kanji on one side, yeah.
And then a price. And then you're like, wait, is that a price? And you start flipping through and you realize it is a price.
Yes.
And it's just a little ad. And the art is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. By all means gorgeous. And beautifully sketched in a way that it feels appropriate for the setting, for the time, for the feel.
Yeah, the book was super well put together. It looked just as high quality as basically any other mainstream, I would say, AAA and book that I've picked up in the last.
They were very honored in being able to get the artist that they did to do the cover. Like, I can't remember the artist's name off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I feel terrible about that. But they don't normally step away from projects that they're actively working on to do a second project. But when it was presented and the person is also part of the Asian community, they were like, yeah, I'm totally going to take this. And immediately sent them 2 proofs of ideas.
Absolutely.
And they were like, we'll take this one.
Great.
Yeah, and that's beauty.
It's a beautiful cover, yeah.
No, it really, really comes together with the cover.
I think if you look up on our Twitter,
the art's there.
The art is there, because Twitter automatically pulled the picture for it.
Our marketing person's pretty cool too, so.
Yeah.
Anywho, so it comes with some physical pieces because they wanted it to feel tactile. They wanted you to feel invested, which is another reason why the book looks like it does.
We picked it up on Drive-Thru RPG, so unfortunately we don't have the rest of the physical pieces. Yeah. But it was good for us to be able to review the game system and understand how it's played and whatnot. So do know that there are some specialized pieces of equipment, I suppose.
That are necessary.
Essentially a board and some cards. Because it's almost like a very, very light board game aspect to it.
Yeah.
But there's a part of me that's like a little annoyed that it's got such specialized stuff with it, but then I remember like I've got tons more specialized stuff for my D&D game than
it's kind of scary.
There's no minis, there's no terrain, there's no
Right, and like we've dealt with condition cards before.
I mean, a play board and some cards is not too big of an
not in
ask
the least
at all.
And it helps, just like our condition, our NPC cards that we have. Same thing. They help immerse you in the game.
Exactly. Having a tactile thing in front of you so that you don't have to reference that rule is very good.
So you've got this restaurant board that has the 4 phases of the game, which is the morning, afternoon, evening, and dead of night.
Dead of night.
Which is important. But those phases then just loop. That's part of the gameplay story loop. That's part of it. You move through each one of the phases, you go back to the morning, and each one has importance going into the next.
And then along with that, you also have a couple decks of specialized cards. You've got the Jiangshi cards, which are basically used to mark harm. I wouldn't even call it damage. It's
harm.
It's harm against your resilience.
Yes.
This isn't really a lethal game. We're not really talking about people dying. Pretty much the worst that happens is you get turned into a Jiangshi.
Which isn't necessarily even bad.
Isn't necessarily bad, and doesn't necessarily even happen. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the combat mechanics.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof. Spoiler alert.
Yes.
So there's Jiangshi cards that are there to mark off damage, and essentially your character sheet acts as like an 8-square grid. And the Jiangshi cards literally just fit over 1 square in that grid, and you lose whatever is under that Jiangshi card.
Yeah,
you lose access to it. Yeah. There are Hmong cards. Hmong, I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. And that those are essentially like bad dreams. It's an optional rule. Where if you're getting a little deeper into gameplay, and those are kind of like diet damage cards. Yeah. They serve kind of the same function that Jiangshi cards do, but are just an alternate form of hitting your resilience, and they only do the first 4.
Correct.
There are restaurant cards,
Mm-hmm.
Okay? These detail the chores that you need to do during the morning phase to upkeep your restaurant. And if you fail to complete those chores for whatever reasons, they will then go onto the restaurant board in the center of the table, marking off squares, much like you would do on a character sheet. Whatever space they cover, you lose the special abilities that your restaurant grants you.
Because the restaurant technically is a character.
The restaurant is kind of a character in the same way that, like, the ship is in a lot of space games.
Or the extra is in Kids with Bikes.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that everybody is part of, but at the same time can be affected by the story.
Exactly.
And often is.
And then there's I was a little sketchy of whether there was one or whether there was multiples of these. Defeating the Jiangshi 101 cards.
Yes.
Typically the eldest person gets this card at the table, but it can be delegated to someone else if the party decides to.
Yeah.
And basically they're the person who in the group that has the knowledge on how to combat the Jiangshi.
Yeah. And it's literally their weaknesses and information about them.
Mm-hmm.
So
overall, though, it like I say, it kind of has a board gamey sort of feel to it. It evokes that sort of a feeling rather than like your traditional pen and paper RPG. And I think that's great, honestly. Jiangshi, above all, really cried out to me that it knows exactly what it is. It doesn't try to be anything else.
Very
it's
much
like,
so.
This is a very specialized game for playing exactly this type of story, and we're going to do it the best way we possibly can. Here's all the tools you'll need to do that.
But I think not to get into our ending and wrap up very much about that, but because of that, it refines it, and you can look at it with a different lens. It may not work in another game, but I can take a lot of good information from this refinement.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, or
absolutely.
not. So again, let's get into the mechanics a little bit. Let's talk about character creation. I know you got into the mechanics way heavier than I did.
Yeah. Mechanics are really where I kind of thrive in this sort of stuff. So your character creation, so first off, they've got a whole, 3 pages or something like that on picking your character's name. And when I say it's 3 pages, it's stuff like, here are how, your family name and your, and your personal name are, put together. Here are different ways of pronouncing them and stuff like that, so you understand there are different inflections. She is different than she.
Yeah.
Those are 2 different sounds.
Yeah.
In Mandarin, They go through a lot of that, and your family name is a big important thing.
Yeah.
Because you are creating a family that works this restaurant. Also, likewise as immigrants, a lot of people would take on an English name. My name might be Xue Chong, but you can call me Sarah.
Right.
Because it's easier for white people to say.
Right.
Right. And it was part of the assimilation, sort of process into that. Some people felt differently about whether or not, you should take on an English name or not. Some people might have one, some people might not. We don't know.
And then there's the generational difference, your age stepping into it. And it's an important part of having an elder, a parent, children, and knowing and having that power discrepancies between them. And I say power in the sense of authority is very clear. They were the wiser ones.
Yes.
Who you look up to.
Yes.
Hence why the 101 card ends up going to the eldest.
Exactly. Because the eldest is the wisest.
That's
obviously.
Right. Yeah.
Now then you've got, a number of squares that make up your character sheet. So one of those squares is an everyday item.
Which I love.
It's just a thing.
Yeah.
It's just a thing that your character has. That's a useful thing. How it works basically for you is that once per day, if you can in some way incorporate that thing into a scene, it allows you to re-roll the highest die of your dice pool. And we'll get into the dice mechanics in a little bit. Suffice to say, you're rolling a bunch of D8. You want to get as high of numbers as possible without rolling any 4s. So if you rolled your 2 is your highest die, see if you can maybe work your item into the description and re-roll it and get a 6 instead. Your next, you've also got another item called an heirloom. An heirloom is a personal item, but it's more of a memoir tied to an ancestor. So it might be your great grandmother's favorite earrings or something like that.
Yeah.
the ancestor that it is tied to, you can consult with once per day.
Which I love.
Gets a little bit of plot information out. And then also, you can actually break the item. Like, literally physically destroy the item once.
Yeah.
Because once it's broken, even if you mend it, it's never going to be the same again.
Right.
It severs the tie to the ancestor, setting them free, but you instantly heal 3 resilience on yourself or anyone else in the scene.
Which I think is great, and you see that actually a lot in stories and movies from it. So I feel like that felt like a very necessary thing to have in there. I love it.
It's cool because it gives everybody kind of a panic button too. Then 2 of your squares are going to be skills. Skills, there's a decent sized list of skills. There's no ratings for them or anything like that. You only get 2 skills. And your skills are things like cooking, writing, things like that. If your skill comes into play, if you have cooking as a skill and you are asked to cook the evening meal, and let's see how well it's done because you have an important guest tonight, so let's see how that turns out. Well, you have the cooking skill, you get to re-roll. You can re-roll your dice pool at -1 die if you don't like the first result.
Right.
That's great. Gives you 2 chances, basically.
Yep.
And then 2 more of your things are called facets. Facets are not skills, kind of backgrounds, function a little bit like edges or feats might. Interests. They're like not really skills or professions, but they're things that you're good at outside of what you
I feel like they're the Shadowrun knowledge list.
Yeah.
Because they're not something that you can actually rely on, but it's something you're familiar with. Like, for instance, I might be familiar with, anime, or K-pop, or I might have an express knowledge in, ancient swords. Doesn't make me a sword master, but I am aware of them.
Yeah. We're having a tough time describing them, but like you'll know what when you see the list, you'll know exactly how to use a facet.
Yes.
And then facets have their own rules to them. Basically, they give you like kind of its own little thing, like a trick you can kind of do. So that's why I kind of compare them to like edges or feats.
Yeah.
Language is likewise a very important part because you are Chinese immigrants. So how well do you speak Chinese? What dialect of Chinese do you speak? Cantonese, Mandarin, and each one of these is broken down as your English and your Chinese dialect is broken into listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And there are 3 points you can potentially put into each one. So a rating of 0 through 3. And you have 13 points to spend. So not enough for fluency in both.
Nope.
So really pick what you want to be good at. Do you want to be a little good at both, or do you want a child maybe born in the middle of a dual language speaking family that's maybe trying their best to assimilate, but or do you want to be one of that fully assimilated kid that just loves American culture and really never learned to speak Chinese?
Yeah, can't read or write it at all. Maybe can barely understand the family. But because dad speaks it.
Or are you staunchly refusing to assimilate into American culture because screw them, they're a bunch of racists anyways, and you're just going to keep speaking Chinese because it was good enough for your family and everybody around you can understand it anyways. So
Yep.
You make your choices about who your character is and how language affects your integration into it. And then lastly, you've got your hopes and dreams.
Yep.
Now your hopes and dreams are really just a descriptor of what your character's goals are.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be too deep. It's just like, learn to be a jazz musician.
Sure.
Cool. Okay. Anytime you're acting in favor of your hopes and dreams, you can gain a personal die. And a personal die is kind of along the lines of like a personal die pool you can throw into certain things as bonuses. Think of it a little bit like inspiration in 5th edition D&D.
Yep.
Only you can have multiples. You can create a small dice pool out of them if you get multiple of them. Maybe like drama die in 7th C.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Maybe effectively a little bit like Bennies in Savage Worlds.
To a degree, yeah.
But anyways, they're tokens you can earn for extra
Including,
benefit.
Yep.
Yes.
So then we have the restaurant, which is its own character, like we had talked about.
Yeah.
It's as important, if not more so, than the rest of the characters because they're the ones surviving within it.
Mm-hmm.
It is the crux and focus of everything.
It's your home base.
Yeah. So it has to survive. It has to exist. And because of that, you have to develop it, which I love. Like, I love games that develop not only the space that, you know, what you're playing in, but also the largest component of it.
It was very reminiscent of, like, Kids on Bikes, where they were like, okay, let's talk about the small town you exist in. What's the school mascot? What's the town known for, you know?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. And it's very much you go through those sort of things in your own restaurant. What's your signature dish? What's your biggest clientele? You know, where in Chinatown are you?
Yeah.
You know, are you close to the financial district? Are you close to the docks? You know, you know, what's your signature dish?
Yeah. Because of that
is grandma's, you know, pork dumplings the thing that everybody shows up for? You know,
right.
Some secret recipe that's been passed down through the family.
And because of that, you get abilities from the restaurant. That as long as it's functional, as long as it's in good repair, it's clean, the chores have been completed, you're doing that, it helps you along with your goals. On the other hand, if you start failing, like with yourself, you lose those abilities. They get covered. So things like re-rolls, bonus dice, things like that can happen once per day per play or for the whole party could just get wiped out because you didn't take care of the kitchen.
You didn't have enough time to cook all the noodles.
Yeah.
So now you just can't serve noodle dishes that day, and that means you also don't get the bonus die, you know, for re-rolls or whatever.
Yeah.
Now you can get these things back if at a later point you can finish those things off and complete the tasks again to get those cards removed. But you know, it'd be rough. I don't know. There is this slow push towards entropy that your restaurant kind of has.
Yep.
And you've got to not only take care of yourselves, but also take care of the restaurant, et cetera. If the restaurant falls into disrepair, you effectively lose.
Yeah.
Like, the whole reason you're doing this is to defend and upkeep your restaurant.
Yeah.
Like, the Jiangshi are like, almost incidental to that.
They're the weather.
They're the weather. You want... you want to keep the restaurant safe from not only the gangs and the police and outside factors like your grocer not giving you the correct groceries, but also the Jiangshi.
Yeah.
And that's it. Defend the restaurant. That's the game, you know?
Yep. But there's no real advancement.
No. And the game is very clear about that right up front. It outright says that this is a game designed basically for one-shots, or like short-term play, like maybe 5 game sessions if you really get in depth, like once per day in a 5-day story.
Yeah.
There's no experience points, there's no advancement, there's no metric for any of that. And really, what would you do with it? Maybe more points in language, I guess, but like...
Yeah, or even like, do you move through parts of the family? Like this first part this act 1 is the opening of the restaurant in the area, and the next one is like a midpoint in history, maybe when the younger people are a little bit older. You could do something like that.
I could see that, but I think you would just make up the characters fresh for each time. You know, there's no scalability to the characters. There's no like attributes.
Nope.
So there's no numbers to really increase. Like I said, the 13 points in language is the only
spendable,
real spendable. Like maybe you couldn't even give yourself another skill because a skill takes up a slot, one of the 8 slots on your character sheet that represents your resilience.
Right.
There's not even room for it on the character sheet to add another skill or anything like that, you know?
No.
So,
I mean, you could alter your, I guess your passion. That'd be about it. But
that's a lateral change.
Yeah.
That's not an advancement.
Right.
So, but again, the game knows exactly what it is. It knows exactly what it does. So it does not have an advancement system.
Mechanically.
So mechanically.
Yeah.
We mentioned the game's played in 4 phases. Morning, afternoon, evening, and the dead of night. Each phase has gameplay that kind of accompanies it.
Right.
A particular beat in the story that goes along with it. Your morning phase is kind of it's probably the more heavily mechanical phase of the 4. because that's when all your restaurant prep happens. You have the restaurant cards that get passed out. Everybody gets two restaurant cards in the morning. Those detail essentially a chore that you need to do. Cleaning the restaurant, writing, changing up the menus, preparing certain things in the back of the house, like the noodles or whatever. Each one of these things has a certain amount of time that needs to be devoted to it. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where your resilience, this is where losing sections of your character sheet comes into play. Mm-hmm. Because not only do you have 8 slots on your character sheet corresponding to things like your item and your skills and your heirlooms and stuff like that, mm-hmm. but each one of those slots has an amount of time written on it. Mm-hmm. Your first 4 have 1 hour, your second 4 are each half hour, for a total of 6 hours. Mm-hmm. As you lose resilience, as you become you gain Jiangshi cards or Hmong cards that block off these things, you lose the amount of time that is attached to them. Mm-hmm. Every morning, you have to allot that amount, time that you have to spend on completing the chores to upkeep the restaurant.
And if you don't have those slots of time,
if you don't have enough time amongst all your characters to complete all of the chores, whatever doesn't get done gets placed on the restaurant board and starts blocking off restaurant abilities. Mm-hmm. It starts falling into disrepair. Those detail what happens, what the consequences are, and details what needs to be done to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like this is the part where your restaurant really comes into play. Mm-hmm. This makes or breaks your restaurant every morning. So the consequences of getting in a rough fight with Jiangshi the night before, leaving one of your characters heavily damaged, essentially,
tired and
with only 1 hour worth of chore time to prepare. I mean, that wipes 5 hours worth of chores off the board. Now you have to delegate those out to other people. Maybe you're you know what? We're just not putting noodles on the menu today because we don't have enough time to boil the noodles.
And that card goes down.
Yeah. And so there's this sort of attrition that happens, mm-hmm.
So then you have your afternoon and evening, which is your lunch and your dinner. And this is where RP kind of steps into things.
Yeah, these are a lot less structured as game phases.
Right. So afternoon is where you're going to have the more general role play that are going to occur. You're going to have elements of the day-to-day stuff. The police come by and trying to do something with you, or protection money, or the lunch customers, the white customers, the non-Asian customers who are coming in asking for food, however they choose to do it,
Right.
Sometimes gang violence, the Tong, which we kind of talked about at dinner, but we're not going to go into heavy detail about, but effectively, rivals that have come over from China and or trying to hold their ground there, as well as just resolving other issues with the restaurant that are going on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the one of the plots you're running is your big thing is pork dumplings, and all of a sudden there's a pork shortage or something like that.
Yeah,
because for whatever reasons there's a supply issue.
Yeah, you're gonna have to change over your menu from your signature dish or something.
Exactly. And what if there's NPCs that are getting uppity about that, et cetera, et cetera. It's all dealing with that sort of stuff during the day. Basically, your mundane problems are going to happen during the day, and I say mundane as opposite of supernatural.
Right.
Now in the evening, evening is when the Jiangshi appear.
The spoopy. Now we haven't gotten to the dead of night. We'll get to that.
Right. But once the sun sets in the evening, that is when the Jiangshi can start appearing. And so your threats turn supernatural. And they possibly show up during your dinner service. Mm-hmm. Because, keeping in mind, the evening service is still during, the waking hours.
Yeah.
That's dinner time for people. So, it's an interesting blend where, your afternoon is all mundane, your dead of night is after everybody's gone to bed, so that's all supernatural, but then there's that evening in the middle where the two cross over, where suddenly you've got, possibly innocent bystanders getting caught in the crossfire of a fight with the Jiangshi.
Yeah, what's a dinner show versus versus the reality of doing something?
Dinner guest shows up sick and slowly turns into a Jiangshi throughout the course of dinner,
Right.
things like that, and then starts eating the other guests. So, and then like I said, the dead of night is like your witching hour. It's the phase where it's basically just all no holds barred on the Jiangshi.
Right.
And again, these aren't really structured. Like the morning shift it definitely has a gameplay element like built right into it, but like the afternoon, evening, and dead of night are just thematic role-play beats for the storyteller to fill in themselves.
Well, and I also feel like that you start in the morning and it feels like, well, the first morning is going to be easy.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. It's gonna have some role play to it, but it's gonna be light. It's gonna be mostly discussionary and pass out and things like that. The next morning after,
especially depending on how rough the last night was,
right, might be very challenging. And now the day, it's that attrition of stress that's now built into the more mechanical aspects of the game.
And what's more is every morning when you wake up, you remove one from the family die pool. So the family has less and less resources progressively to deal with threats.
Yep. And that right there is the attrition of the game. We talk about like, what is the game teaching you? And right there is a core mechanic of how is this game meant to be played.
You've got to come together as a family.
It's meant to be a grind that is done cooperatively. And I love that concept. Again, this is like one of those little takeaways where I'd be like, I wonder how I would roll this into Shadowrun.
I don't think you can roll into Shadowrun.
I think you could.
I think thematically Shadowrun is way too cynical, and it's way too every man for themselves. I think Jiangshi does an amazing job of pitting the entire family as one cohesive unit against a hostile outside world, both mundane and supernatural threats. And both of those things cause the family to fold in on itself and defend itself and work together through their own differences. And I don't think you can get that in Shadowrun.
Okay, sir. Sir, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. That's fair. But you really couldn't do that outside of the mechanics that they've established.
Yeah.
Like it makes it very beautiful and very that cross between table board game, which might even have a not cooperative aspect to it if you really thought about it, and forces through the role play the cooperative aspect.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
It is beautiful.
I mean, outright, like, like they give gameplay examples of, like, following your hopes and dreams, you know? And I brought up, like, the jazz musician thing because that's an actual gameplay example they give, where it's like, hey, we need you to serve dinner tonight. Grandma says you need to stay here and serve dinner tonight in the restaurant, but there's a jazz concert.
Quartet or something going on.
In town.
Yeah,
and you want to go see it. So do you stay here and, forgo your hopes and dreams, or do you skip out on dinner service, which possibly hurts the restaurant, to go and follow your hopes and dreams? Yeah, sure, you get a personal die out of it, but there might be consequences to the restaurant. On the other hand, if you stay behind, you haven't pursued your hopes and dreams, but maybe Grandma's hopes and dreams are that the family will all come together to help the restaurant, and you did that. So Grandma gets a die because you didn't go out.
Yep.
No,
but it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
So, speaking of which...
Speaking of dice...
There are two dice pools.
So there's the family dice,
yes,
which sit in the center of the restaurant board. Yep. The family dice will sit on the quadrant of they'll sit in the morning, afternoon, night, or dead of night areas of the board.
Right.
Typically, the storyteller will set what the pool size is to start with. Typically it's like 4 or 5 D8. It's all D8 in this game.
Makes it nice.
And if you buy the box, it comes with gold dice and red dice. The gold ones are for individuals, the red are family dice.
Yeah.
And then, like we said earlier, every morning, if this is a multi-day story, you remove one of those from the pool. So there's a slow attrition of the family dice pool. This is the pool basically everyone's going to roll for most challenges. Everybody at the table is going to be using the family dice for pretty much everything.
Right.
Now, on the other hand, you do have individual dice. If you fail a check using the family dice pool, you gain a individual die. Or, if you follow your hopes and dreams, you also gain an individual die. And these are golden D8s that will sit in front of you personally. They can be spent to either assist other players. You roll them, and if you don't roll a 4, you can replace their highest die with yours. It's assuming it's higher than anything they rolled.
Right.
And you can use it to push a roll, essentially adding it to your own rolls to try to get a better result out of it. Either way, the individual dice are expended once they're used.
They're totally turned back in. Yep.
So your dice mechanics basically are, you will take the entire die pool of D8 and you roll them. Now, for each 4 rolled, you cancel out the highest die in the pool.
Right.
Okay, so what that means is, if you roll a 1, 4, 5, 7.
On your 4 dice.
1, 4, 5, 7. That 4 cancels the 7 because the 7 is the highest one in the pool.
And 5 is the highest that you got.
And 5 is the next highest, which means 5 is your result.
Yep.
It's whatever the highest die in your pool is after your 4s cancel out your other results.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's simple. 7 and 8 is a success. 5 and 6 is success with consequences, which you know we love. And 1 and 3 is a failure. You can't roll a 4 because 4s are just cancellations.
Yeah.
If you have more 4s than you do other dice, if you ever have 0 dice remaining...
And it's 4s. Or your 4s cancel it out, yeah.
Yeah, if after canceling with 4s, if you have 0 dice remaining, that is a critical failure. It's a result of 0.
Yeah, which is an old mechanic that's floated around for a long time.
It was very reminiscent of White Wolf, actually, because first edition Vampire, 1s canceled your successes.
Now, 4 is pronounced...
So I only know the Japanese end of this.
Right.
So I can only speak for that, but I do know that culturally it follows over in Japanese.
Okay.
4 and death are both pronounced shi.
Okay.
Now they are different kanji, they are different symbols.
Right.
But since they are both said shi, 4 is considered an unlucky number.
Gotcha.
And so that's specifically why this is the number that cancels out successes here.
Okay.
But also, just on a cultural note, if you go to Japan, it's treated very much like the number 13 over here, where you'll see parking spaces numbered 1, 2, 3, 5.
Right.
Because you just don't have something labeled 4.
Yeah.
Why would you?
Or in out in Vegas where they'll skip floors for the same reason because you don't want to be on an unlucky floor.
On an unlucky floor, exactly.
Yep.
Also, in Japanese, instead of saying shi for 4, you will say yon, which is just another way of saying 4 that isn't like death.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, anyways, very simple dice mechanics.
Yeah.
And you basically do that for everything.
Combat is the one that, when I thought about a game that involved vampires and dealing with vampires, my brain went to, okay, combat. And then I went, what?
We have a damage system.
Yep.
We have a protagonist that is literally the title of the game. And we don't have a combat system.
Not really.
It's... Combat is very, like a lot of other things in this game system, is very, whatever the table wants. There aren't a lot of, hard combat rules. It's very, situationally narrative.
That's what I thought about it. You're handling the situation. However.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, describe to me how you're gonna fight the Jiangshi off. Well, I've got, my special item is a cast iron walk. So what if I hit them with the walk? Okay, sounds good. Roll your family dice.
Yep.
And it's just going to be the same roll as everything else. You're going to take the family pool, you're going to roll it, you're going to take your highest number. If it succeeds, cool. You bonked the Jiangshi on the head with your cast iron walk. In fact, hey, you used your special item, so you get, your extra bonus off of that,
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just like that. And maybe you failed that roll, and so, like I said, there's 5 and 6 is success with consequences, and 1 through 3 is a failure. If you failed that roll, maybe the Jiangshi gets the better of you. Maybe you take some damage. The storyteller might decide it's appropriate for you to take 1. Maybe 1 card on a consequence, a success with consequence, but 2 Jiangshi cards if you failed outright.
Right. Right.
Or maybe just 2 on a crit fail.
Right.
I don't know. Whatever the vibe at the table is.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of where this game comes down.
Yeah.
There are mechanics for healing. Kind of.
Yeah.
There's like you can break your heirloom for 3 points of healing to heal. Essentially remove 3 Jiangshi cards from anybody in the scene collectively.
Yep.
And there's also like herbalism and woo magic and stuff like that they talk about in there, that can be used. And again, it's all very narrative, hand wavy, just whatever the vibe at the table is.
Yeah.
If you can explain it all right and it seems like it fits with the story, cool.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Cause it's one of those games that is supporting the players and supporting the story and continuing the story. It's not about an attrition of hit points and boxes, at inappropriate moments.
It's funny because the vibe of the game can go anywhere from like night of horror, terror, sort of stuff, all the way up to like Bob's Burgers.
Yeah, and there's a certain feeling that like even the creators of the game were like, I absolutely love what we do in the shadows. Like that vibe of that the Jiangshi could be literally that. They're just kind of hokey. They definitely have an organization and they're definitely spoopy things, but at the same time, like, they don't have their crap together. They're like 2 steps above the wandering dead that kind of stare at you in Plants vs. Zombies. Like, they're there. And so or they could be super spoopy, like have some kind of leadership that has a motivation and a drive. It doesn't mean they're all gonna be like, CR13 vampire lords.
Oh yeah. This is not a game about like, this is not Buffy the Vampire Slayer necessarily, where you're gonna be going out and hunting, the legions of the. No, it's not.
You're not a Belmont. That's not what's happening here.
Exactly. No, you're a bellhop.
Exactly. At best.
So, but even like Death and Dying, what if all 8 squares on your card are covered by Jiangshi cards?
Well, you can't help with family in the morning.
Yeah, well, yes, precisely.
That's the first thing
you're out of time you can expend to you're useless in the morning.
Right.
You can become a Jiangshi yourself.
Yep.
But even this is literally prefaced by like, if the player wants.
Sure.
They don't have to. You can't really force a person to play a Jiangshi if they don't want to.
No. Maybe they're just very sick.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. They got better.
Gameplay continues.
Yeah.
Like, we get the point. It's more interested in telling the story than it is in like hard mechanics of like punishment for, failure. It's just very fun and very loose.
And the game ends when it feels like it needs to end at the table.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Like, we finished the 4th night and dealt with the one dude in town. Do you guys feel like that's a good scene?
Yeah. Seems like we could probably wrap it here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
It doesn't mean that we couldn't pick things back up
and epilogue. You go on to fight the Jiangshi for the next 4 weeks and you eventually beat them. Cool.
Yeah. Excellent.
But without their leader intact, they fall to pieces.
Exactly.
You're all held as heroes. The end.
Yeah. Or even the shift of like the Jiangshi kick you out of your restaurant and you guys are all packed up on the train heading somewhere new with the things that you could make as you see the town kind of basically falling into disarray. That's a possibility too. The story is the story. So.
All right, let's give our closing thoughts on this one. What do we like about Jiangshi?
I think the book is a delight. 100% from the menu, the art, it's a baked-in flavor. And I say that in tongue-in-cheek, but also in what they were trying to accomplish, they did. And they did it so well that it makes you want to keep reading through it. And I think that they made you feel like what you needed to feel as you stepped through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sold itself very well. I loved every aspect of that.
For me, the big highlight of the book was the fact that 71 pages were dedicated to history and culture and religion, and really giving a very clear, very concise, and easy to understand picture of what the cultural background and conditions and setup for a Chinese immigrant in the 1920s are, that I, a Polish, English, white girl from Detroit, felt very comfortable going, I have about 4 character concepts I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And that I would feel comfortable playing.
Yeah. At the same time, reading through it, it made me recognize things that I do in my stories with other races. Why I think about things in a certain light or direction.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of those things natively, but I'm like, oh man, there's a lot of this that comes from other cultures.
Oh yeah.
Tolkien did what he did in the way that he did it because he was representing a time and a place in his mind and in history. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that that's the way the world should be. It's a snapshot, but he didn't give us the preface that, the orcs were meant to be thugs imparting their way across Europe, and built for war, like that was a vision, but this book doesn't do that. It pulls all the layers back and shows it to you.
Yeah, really, really humanizes everybody and gives you that clear picture that, like, even when shadier stuff came up, there were reasons for that shady stuff to come up, and there were reactions to other stuff that, may or may not, just a big web of stuff that really paints a full picture for you. So.
Yeah, there's a lot to be taken from that.
And I mean, it pulls no punches, and it's designed being a short story. It knows exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. It does that thing very well. It doesn't try to do anything that it isn't. It says, do you want to play a fun little game in a short form about a bunch of Chinese immigrants in the 1920s fighting both racists and jumping vampires?
While trying to keep a restaurant alive.
Let's do it.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, and I see the beauty, and I think that by having it on a physical board with physical materials makes a huge difference. They did the right thing by blending things like this. And it is a great blend of everything we talk about, where we often think that we role-play tabletop games. This is role-playing a tabletop game in many ways. And I think that's wonderful. I think it does that amazingly well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You could play this strictly as, like, a tabletop game in many ways.
You could.
But, like, you could play it with people who are comfortable with tabletop games because they can see the mechanics of it. I think that the breakdown happens in the evening and dead of night when it's narrative.
Yeah, well, even in the afternoon it becomes narrative.
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really where, like, your hardcore board gamers are going to.
But you still have boxes. You still have frames. You still have roles. It's just a different stage.
There's enough structure, at least, to kind of understand what you're doing. But it does demand of your players some role playing.
Yes, and a lot of social understanding of how the mechanics socially work in the game.
I mean, I think we need to be clear that this is a role-playing game with board game-like elements to it.
Yes.
Not a board game with some role-playing in it.
Correct. It swings the other direction.
Yes, it is 75% role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. With a lot of just physical aspects to help.
Yes, exactly.
And give you a stronger feel of what's going on and show the action to everyone.
And instead of miniatures and terrain, you've just got the restaurant board and some cards.
Yeah, there's nothing to say that you couldn't add a doom clock physically to your role-playing game.
There's a doom clock. It's called the restaurant board.
Well, I meant to another role-playing game.
Oh, yeah,
that shows as the plot changes, the doom clock changes, and you're like, uh-oh. Mm-hmm. That adds a level of tension. We've talked about this with Jenga towers and everything else. This game does it a different way.
Physicality to it, yeah.
And sets the tension at a different point because of that.
Yeah.
It's a give and take, but mostly a take as those dies are removed.
As your Jiangshi cards build up, as your Hmong cards build up.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So where do we start falling off on this game?
I don't know that Jiangshi really falls off for me anywhere. There's definitely certain things that it doesn't do well.
Fair enough.
But I think the things that it doesn't do well are things that you wouldn't ask it to do.
That's fair.
I feel like Jiangshi is, like I said, it's a very specialized tool for telling a very specialized story. Mm-hmm. And for me, though, it's like asking, judging a fish on its ability to ride a bicycle.
Yeah, that's fair.
Fish suck at riding bicycles in the same way that Jiangshi sucks at being any other type of role-playing game. Mm-hmm. It is a great game for doing exactly what it is designed for. I would never use this system for doing any other type of game.
No. I could see someone, like, as I was going through things, I could see someone adapting this for like literally just replacing words.
Yeah.
And having an airship that is capturing lightning in Cloud World, and there are enemies that attack it. You could do that and follow some of the same mechanics, but it wouldn't even remotely be the same because it doesn't have the cultural aspects that add the role play.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, literally anything it's not designed for is just, the dice system for me. I'm sure it works in play. I did watch an actual play of it, actually GM'd by Banana-chan, one of the authors.
Yeah.
Which was delightful. Easily findable on YouTube, if you're interested. But for me, like, the dice system, it brought back flashbacks of Nat 1's.
The White Wolf failure?
In White Wolf.
Yeah.
And there was, I do remember, and I don't remember the math behind it. I was never good at that part of it, but I do remember that there was an inflection point at which actually rolling more dice was mathematically more detrimental than it was helpful.
If we had Overwatch, he would explain it. I remember him explaining it to me, like where the number game ended.
Right. Now, I don't think the number of dice get high enough in Jiangshi to be able to do that.
Correct.
So I'm pretty sure it doesn't suffer the same problem, but it at least evoked that sort of, that I recoiled a little bit when I was like, oh, 4s remove successes. That doesn't feel good.
Right.
But it seemed like in the actual play, it felt like it was good.
Yeah.
There was some high rolls, there was some low rolls. You've got a broad range of successes and stuff like that. And with between special abilities, re-rolls, and your individual dice that you can add into just rolls here and there and help other people, it seemed like there was enough ways to get around
hard fate.
Yeah, hard fate of just rolling a handful of 4s and being screwed.
Right. I think the stress levels of this game are appropriate and definitely more heroic than I would think actually serving people is.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And then my last nitpick, is that, this is a very narrative heavy game.
Yes.
And I know that some players like and need firm rules, or they start feeling adrift in the system.
Yeah.
Even I, I mean, and I do like narrative systems a lot better than I like crunchy systems. Even this one left me feeling a little like, where are the rest of the rules? Like, I literally did a double take when I was like, okay, let's get into the combat section, and where's the combat section? I see the damage section, but I don't see how you fight things.
Blood in the banquet hall.
Right.
Jumping vampires.
Blood in the banquet hall.
Like, where's the combat?
Yeah. And then the whole combat section was, whatever the vibe of the table is,
Yeah, like dwarves mining for gold. What's the mining mechanic?
Right.
But the truth is, Banquet is in the title. And that's the real stress point.
Yeah.
There are snakes on the plane. We're not fighting snakes. We're on a plane. That's the key.
The operative term here is banquet hall, not blood.
Correct.
So, that's really just my other nitpick is just that, people who need rules and structure are not going to, really have a good time with this system, I think.
Yeah.
It's very narrative heavy, very just, let's tell a story together that's fun. And we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I definitely see this as a fun story to be played with people who are interested in doing something different. If you just, like, if you needed a fill spot between games.
Yeah.
Like, you've been playing D&D, you want to switch over to Shadowrun, you're not ready to run your game, or somebody doesn't have their next thing, throw this in there. It is a change-up, without a doubt.
This game, to me, screamed like, hey, a friend from out of town's coming in and we're gonna throw a little party on Friday night. Wouldn't it be cool if we just played some Jiangshi?
Yeah. Or, I'm going to a convention. Like, somebody asked me to run a game at a table. I'll run Jiangshi.
Yeah.
I'll have some pre-gen characters. We'll get, we can roll through it.
3 hours, one box set.
Your camping trips.
Yeah.
This would be, I mean, it's a little physical heavy.
played inside. That's fine.
Yeah, you could still do it. But it uses there are some whiteboard mechanics to it as well. I think there's some markers and pens in it as well. Yeah. So, but they used whiteboard design and that's why the card stock is so quality and so heavy, is that they wanted you to be able to reuse it again and again and again. Yeah. I think that's great. But
it's great.
Yeah. So I would recommend this game, definitely, especially for people who are narrative heavy. But and I will say this, also for storytellers who need an easier story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is as close to railroady narrative as you can get.
Yeah, it kind of is. Like, you kind of know what you're gonna get when you get to a game of Jiangshi.
And that's the whole beauty. Like, you're still gonna tell a story. But the thing is you know what you're getting into. Everybody knows what it is.
I don't think that's great, though. Like, let's play Kung Fu Hustle. Oh, really? What are we gonna be doing in that,
Right. Like, I get it. But at the same time, like, we always talk about railroading being a bad thing, and realistically, it is a series of events. You are not railroading.
Look, railroading is only when the players want to do something different and you say, no, you can't do that. We are doing this instead.
Right.
That's not railroady to say, let's all agree to tell this story.
Right.
But
I mean, but this teaches you're making a plot point. You're not directing your players toward a scene. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, a Jiangshi shows up during the dinner hour, or someone at the table becomes one because, the local mafia don comes in and he's a Jiangshi and he kind of is like, he's just like, unless you pay us, you will suffer greatly. And you're like, get out of here. We don't need your kind, we can take care of ourselves. And you're like, well, you're going to suffer anyways. Mm. And as the night progresses, one of your patrons slowly turns into a monster in the corner.
Yeah.
Both figuratively and physically, and starts drinking and going after your other patrons. Now you have to handle that situation as best you can. And then the police show up and it becomes a situation. But how it's handled, that's totally up to your players.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fate. And that's where this game kind of allows the storyteller to sit back and just present stuff out.
Yeah, yeah.
Versus writing an epic campaign. You've got them all trapped in a room.
Yeah, exactly. You need to tell this one little, corner of Chinatown, and there's a lot of different aspects you can bring into that. Yeah. You don't have to, but you've got a broad toolbox of things that they easily spell out for you, of all the different influences. And that kind of brings me to where my recommendation would come from. Sure. I mean, obviously, this is a great little, tidy little game that's great for short runs if you need something like that. But at the same time, I would highly recommend this, honestly, just for the first 70 pages of the book. We debate a lot on this show about, playing things of different cultures, of different backgrounds, playing a character of a different sexuality or different gender, different race, and how can you do that tactfully? And the first 70 pages of this book are literally the guide manual on how to do that tactfully and respectfully and honor the character that you're playing rather than stereotyping them.
No, I completely agree, and that's kind of what drew me to it, as much as it did. And honestly, I think when we step into our 202s a bit more and get back to shows, this is definitely going to be another guidepost for us. So
yeah, 100%. So you want to talk about next week's show?
Yes. Building Mysteries.
Building the Mysteries.
Which we've touched upon it in the past, like many times before, but we've got some new information. We've definitely we're culminating a lot more things to try and help people build better mysteries that your players aren't just totally lost in.
Yeah.
And some things that we've done, some stuff that I've definitely made mistakes on, and some stuff that I ran across and you directed me to, funnily, the 3 rule. The 3 clue rule, which I think is fantastic. Yeah. I'd read it once before and I totally forgot about it, and then we refound it and I'm like, we're putting that right back in.
But, anyways, running mystery elements in your games, it's often a little tough, but, I was running kind of a mystery element in the first half of my current.
I want to break that down, but, we'll have fun next week.
Absolutely. All right. So you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us up on our Discord. You can find the link up on our Twitter, as well as our website, storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members, especially our name members, who help us out every single month. Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion Veteran, Subjet, and Hulavu. We really appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. And our intro music, which is by the Beyond the Warriors,
You can do it.
by Geefrog, you can find it at geefrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, Only Our Footprints in the Sand, is by Midair Machine, and you can find that at freemusicarchive.org.
Big shout out as always to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us all these years.
Thank you.
All of our friends who sat with us at our tables over the years to give us these great stories to share with you, as well as you, all every single one of our listeners. We love you so much.
Good night.
Good night.